Two engineers can stand in front of the exact same 18-speed gearbox, one from Detroit, one from Stuttgart, and walk away with opposite verdicts about whether it belongs in a modern truck at all. Somewhere in the gap between those two verdicts is a decision shaped by emissions law, city streets built centuries before trucks existed, and who actually pays the repair bill when something breaks, details neither side usually thinks to mention when they call the other one wrong. If you assume this is just a stubborn, old-school habit versus modern technology, wait until you see how much of it comes down to physics neither driver controls. And if engineering decisions like this one are your kind of thing, stick around and subscribe, because this channel breaks these down often. So tell me in the comments, are you team manual or team automated, and why? Why would two continents building trucks for the same basic job end up this far apart on something so fundamental? And is one of them actually about to become obsolete? The honest answer is that this disagreement did not start as an opinion. It started as a set of completely different problems, and only later hardened into something that looks a lot like an opinion. European engineers did not wake up one day and decide manual shifting was old-fashioned because it felt unfashionable. They arrived at that conclusion because the regulatory and operational environment they were building trucks for made a computer-controlled gearbox the obviously correct answer, while the American environment, for decades, made the manual gearbox the obviously correct answer. Two correct answers to two different questions that just happen to look like the same question from a distance. Let's start with what actually changed the math in Europe, because this is the part most people outside the industry never hear about. Emissions regulation in the European Union tightened in stages that most American observers never fully appreciated, moving from the earliest Euro standards through to Euro 6, and each generation of that regulation demanded a cleaner combustion process from the engine. Cleaner combustion sounds like a purely chemical problem, but it is really a mechanical one in disguise, because every time engineers redesign a combustion cycle to cut nitrogen oxide and particulate output, they also shrink the narrow band of engine speed where that cycle actually runs efficiently. A modern diesel built to European emissions targets is a phenomenally clean and capable machine, but it is also fussier than its ancestors about staying inside a tight operating window. Step outside that window and fuel economy and emissions performance both fall off fast. Now think about what that does to the gearbox. If the engine's happy zone keeps getting narrower, the gearbox has to be more precise about keeping the engine inside it, shift after shift, for every single kilometer of a route that might run through mountain passes, city traffic, and open motorway all in the same afternoon. A human driver, however skilled, is working from feel, from experience, from the sound of the engine and the pressure of the accelerator underfoot. A computer reading engine load, road gradient, and vehicle speed dozens of times per second is working from data. And when the acceptable margin for error keeps shrinking the way European emissions rules pushed it to shrink, data starts to reliably beat feel. That is not an insult to the driver. That is just what happens when the target gets smaller than human reaction time can consistently hit. There is a second force pulling in the same direction, and it is almost invisible if you have never actually tried to drive a truck through a European city center. Much of Europe's road network was built long before anyone imagined an articulated lorry navigating it, and a huge share of European freight moves through what the industry calls multi-drop delivery, meaning one truck making a dozen or more stops in a single working day, often in tight urban space, often with the driver hopping in and out of the cab repeatedly. In that kind of stop-start environment, a clutch pedal is not a badge of skill, it is a source of fatigue. Studies on driver physical strain in heavy stop-and-go conditions have consistently found measurably higher leg fatigue among manual transmission operators compared to those running automated systems. And a tired driver making dozens of low-speed maneuvers a day is exactly the kind of safety variable European regulators and fleet operators have been trying to engineer out of the profession for years. Put those two forces together, a shrinking efficient operating window and a delivery culture built around constant stopping and starting, and you get an environment where a computer-controlled gearbox is not a lifestyle preference. It is the rational response to the actual conditions on the ground. European manufacturers leaned into that response hard. Automated systems from the major European builders became standard equipment rather than premium options, and industry-wide sales figures out of Europe have shown automated transmissions taking the clear majority of new heavy truck registrations for years now, to the point where a driver trained exclusively on a clutch pedal is increasingly the exception rather than the rule on that side of the Atlantic. Now flip to the American side of the ocean, because this is where the story stops being about who is right and starts being about who is solving a different problem entirely. The interstate system that defines American long-haul trucking was built for exactly the opposite use case. long, straight, high-speed corridors between distribution hubs, hundreds or even thousands of miles apart, not a dozen tight urban stops in a single shift. In that environment, the efficient operating window for a diesel engine matters, but it is a much less brutal constraint than it is in constant stop-start traffic, because the truck spends the overwhelming majority of its working life cruising at a steady speed on a steady grade. A skilled driver holding a gear on the highway for hours at a time does not need split-second computer precision nearly as badly as a driver navigating 15 deliveries through a medieval town center. Then there is the ownership structure, which changes the entire cost conversation. The owner-operator model, someone who personally owns the truck and is personally paying every maintenance bill out of their own margin, is far more common in the United States than in Europe, where company-owned fleets tend to dominate. When you own the equipment and pay for every repair yourself, a transmission's rebuild cost stops being an abstract fleet management line item and becomes something you feel directly in your bank account. Repair estimates for a modern automated heavy-duty transmission have run into the tens of thousands of dollars in some documented cases, while a well-maintained manual gearbox has a long and well-earned reputation for running past 1,000,000 miles with comparatively simple, widely available parts and mechanics who can service it almost anywhere in the country. For an owner-operator running demanding terrain, that durability gap is not nostalgia. It is a financial argument that shows up every single time something breaks down. So when a European engineer looks at an American driver working an 18-speed manual through the Rockies and calls it outdated, they are usually judging that choice against the conditions they know: dense urban delivery routes, a narrow, emissions-driven operating window, and a fleet ownership model where the company absorbs the repair bill. And when that same American driver hears the word outdated, they are just as reasonably thinking about a completely different set of conditions: long, steady highway grades, an owner who eats every repair cost personally, and a mountain descent where holding the exact gear without any hesitation from a computer is treated as a genuine safety requirement rather than a stubborn preference. Here is the part that neither side likes to admit out loud. Both of them are partly wrong about the other, because both are quietly assuming their own operating environment is the universal default. European engineers tend to underweight just how differently the economics work for an individual owner-operator running mountain freight thousands of miles from the nearest dealership. American drivers, on the other hand, tend to underweight just how much emissions regulation has genuinely narrowed what an engine can do efficiently outside computer-precise shift timing, and how much that narrowing has nothing to do with taste and everything to do with physics. Neither side is being irrational. They are both being locally rational inside globally different systems, and mistaking the other person's correct answer for a wrong one. What makes this genuinely interesting rather than just another old rivalry is that the gap is visibly narrowing, and not because either side is caving to the other's culture. American emissions regulation has been tightening in a direction that increasingly resembles the European trajectory, which means the same physics that pushed European engines toward computer-precise shifting is starting to apply on American roads too. At the same time, automated systems from major manufacturers have kept closing the reliability and cost gap that made manual gearboxes the financially obvious choice for an owner-operator in the first place. Neither transmission philosophy is staying still long enough for either side to declare permanent victory. And underneath all of it sits the development that quietly makes the entire argument temporary. Electric drivetrains do not have a narrow, efficient operating window the way a diesel engine does, because an electric motor produces strong torque across nearly its entire speed range without needing a dozen or 18 carefully spaced ratios to stay happy. As electrification slowly works its way into heavy trucking on both continents, the whole manual versus automated debate stops being a debate about culture or skill and starts becoming a footnote about a particular era of diesel engineering. The argument that feels so charged right now, European precision against American independence, might turn out to be a disagreement that outlives its own subject. So the next time you hear a European engineer wave off the American gearbox as a relic, or an American driver dismiss the European system as a computer doing a human's job worse, it is worth remembering that both of them are actually agreeing on something important without realizing it. They both built exactly the right tool for the road in front of them. The roads just happen to be very different roads.